It is Wednesday, February the 26th, 2020. I'm Gord Long. As is normally the case, we have a lot of charts for us to go through, so therefore we will pass over some of them quickly, but leave you to examine them further at your leisure. You'll need to open your viewer to full screen viewing, or you'll not be able to see some of the detail I will be discussing in the charts. A reminder before we begin, do not trade from any of these slides. They are for educational and discussion purposes only. This month, I'd like to bring together some of our recent global conflict video reports, along with past ones on inflation, as a way to put them in a context of why we see an economic era of stagflation appearing on the horizon. As such, I'd like to discuss the areas highlighted here. Nobel laureate Milton Friedman spelled out the cause of inflation very simply and eloquently. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon in the sense that it is and can be produced only by a more rapid increase in the quantity of money than in output. He would most certainly be rolling over in his grave today knowing that government in the form of its central bank is now both in charge of inflation and that their central policy goal is the specific level targeting of inflation. I've written extensively on inflation for years now, but what is of importance for us today are the recent research efforts listed here. Our 2017 thesis paper spelled out what we termed the illusion of economic growth and how it is massively overstated in real terms. This, along with these three videos in the last year, specifically explored current inflation-deflation pressures, the supply-demand services problem, the global supply-demand problem, and two worlds in conflict. Additionally, our recent three-part macroanalytics video series with Charles U. Smith gave us further parameters around which we could draw some well-founded conclusions and relatively good probabilities on how the global economy will move going forward, at least in the intermediate term. All of these videos and reports, along with some others I will mention later, can be viewed as a reference on the Gordon T. Long YouTube channel and at matasii.com. I'd like to use this grid as a way to place some inflation, stagflation, hyperinflation structure around a number of the ideas that have come out of all these somewhat independent recent research efforts. Shown in the top left is Milton Friedman's monetary explanation for general economic inflation. In the bottom right is hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is well established to be first and foremost a currency event. That is, hyperinflation occurs when the public loses confidence in the currency as a store of value and react accordingly. Again, I have done videos on this, posted on YouTube, showing the 52 historical examples of this being clearly and unquestionably the case. So how do we get from one to the other? If so, what should we look for as warning telltales? Are there near-term triggers that must occur? Something that gets little attention today is the appreciation of the critical importance of velocity of money. It is my long-held view that though I completely agree with Milton Friedman, his statement is often taken too narrowly with little appreciation for what he specifically stated about quantity of money. The quantity of money is only as important as how that money is actually used. That is, how fast or the rate at which the money is moved around, or the velocity or rate of its usage. This is not my opinion, but in fact is a central tenet of what is referred to by economists, and Milton Friedman included, as the quantity theory of money, or the famous core economic equation MV equals PT, where M is the monetary money supply created by central banks, and in my opinion also the shadow banks should be put in there too. V is the velocity of money or circulation. P is the price level of all goods and services in the economy. T is the measure of all transactions of goods and services in the economy. The right side has historically been almost impossible to calculate, but the left side is not. Knowing the left side tells you how the right side is likely to react. We are inundated almost daily with reports of central bank actions and global central banks' balance sheet growth as measures of M, but almost nothing on the critically important V. Well, here's the Fed's velocity of money as measured by M2 money stock. It has been in an almost non-stop free fall since the dot-com bubble implosion. But why? It stands to reason that even the massive increase in M today might only neutralize this fall in V and therefore possibly deliver little change to the right side of that equation. It stands to reason if the rate of T or transactions is also slowing with velocity as you would expect, then P or prices could only be going down. But are they? This is where our grid might help us in our understanding. If we view the horizontal levels as stages and the vertical columns as government policy, central bank actions, and the economic realities of the Main Street economy versus Wall Street, we can separate some of the significant and interrelated ongoing trends. Up until the U.S. went off the gold standard in August 1971, the U.S. dollar was backed by gold. It wasn't a fiat currency. It couldn't be created arbitrarily by the government's central bank. We had sound money in the U.S. and countries around the world who were also expected to have gold-backed money or deliver gold and balancing its current international balance of payments. It isn't about gold. It is about the responsibility of controlling the quantity of money and not allowing countries to spend beyond their means or ability to create real wealth, not artificial paper wealth. Gold historically was the most accepted way of achieving this. Central banks historically policed this and took the punch bowl away from the party when things began to overheat. Today, they have a completely different modus operandi. As all the videos I previously mentioned have highlighted, we have achieved a shift to stage 2, where consumption and credit have replaced savings and productive investment, as we unintentionally impaired capitalism, but expediently and naively replaced it with a creditism-based system. Central bankers have now become pushers of liquidity, flows, and credit to offset plummeting velocity of money in an attempt to keep the right side's T, or transactions, up and have an increase in P as well as P as the price as the target. Meanwhile, additionally, economies working under the macroprudential policies of financial repression to artificially stimulate economic activities and finance government debt via artificially low cost of money and institutional acceptance of increased risk and desperate search for yield has also emerged. The question now is what is to be expected next for stage 3, and would this potentially deliver currency debasement via monetization of debt, which is the central building block for the possibilities of hyperinflation, which historically always leads to a fiat currency failure without exception. We showed in a previous video how the powers to be have effectively trapped themselves by kicking the can down the road and placing the financial system in a fragile state that inevitably will be tested for stability. We recently laid out the details associated with this roadmap. This was part of our arrival at what we saw as an emerging era of conflict. A destabilizing disruptor now sits on a financial world full of fragile distortions, unintended consequences, moral hazards, untested monetary gimmicks from QE to T-Litro, and ever-increasing polarization and a distrusting political environment. As this incredibly accurate roadmap from our video series back in 2012 and the 2012 thesis paper warned us of, we would steadily move towards a world of increasing social unrest, collectivism, complexity, and statism. It was almost guaranteed back then and has in fact come to fruition. Collectivism meant more centralized government control and power, more integration of government and corporate dealings with their self-interests in mind, and significant more socialist leanings in our youth and society overall. All sounds only too familiar today, doesn't it? To finance massive unfunded entitlements in an ever-increasing socialist and large government-developed world will mean fiscal policies of modern monetary theory, MMT, which is neither modern nor a theory, helicopter money, QE for the people, and more. Fiscal imprudence, which will debase the value of currencies. All are forced government stimulus spending policies that ensure the financing of an ever-increasing indebted government edifice. Fiscal spending that becomes increasingly less effective in delivering already problematic economic growth. It is well established that fiscal government spending is increasingly becoming less effective and a drag on the economy. Productive capital is being siphoned from the system to finance government overhead, programs and naively economic malinvestment. Though we are well on our way, we are not there yet. I would argue that in real terms we already have stagflation in the developed economies. This will become increasingly evident and more pronounced going forward. We are in the midst of a Minsky melt-up. Markets are going higher as governments soon are forced to buy and guarantee them to ensure financial stability and any possibility of economic growth and avoidance of an unprecedented Greater Depression. Stage 3's economic stagflation will almost ensure us of this. As I stated at the beginning, we have already done a lot of work in these already posted videos on the current parallel inflation and deflation drivers and how they will continue to evolve. We're going to experience disruptive and problematic stagflation with real inflation and lack of growth before the inevitable Great Deflation when fiat currencies fail. Our 2017 thesis paper shows us the true illusion of real economic growth via archaic accounting and statistical government games such as hedonics, imputation, substitution, and the list goes on, all within a GDP formula that is flawed by the size of the government debt and transfer payments and degree of entitlements and the use of a faulty deflator structure. We have shown how inflation in services is already with us domestically and inappropriately accounted for in our inflation measurement baskets. How, though goods have been held down via import supply chains and radical changes in domestic internet-driven distribution, this is going to change. We have shown in the global supply chain problem video how the supply chain is in a perilous position with slowing demand and a lack of effective price discovery, along with the fallout of the over-sustained demand pull from too many QE-like monetary programs. Our video on the two worlds of developed and emerging economies laid out how a major shift is potentially coming that will herald twin inflation pressures, not the offsetting environment which globalization and labor arbitrage has been shielding us from over the last few decades. Stagflation is going to mean nationalization in many forms where it will be thrust upon us all by a frightened, angry, and demanding public, and forms which will hide it from us where it is perceived as un-American and an infringement on our freedoms. Whatever form or words are used to describe it, from conservatorships to guarantees to government investment, it will nevertheless be nationalization with government at the helm. No matter how it is sold, it is coming. It is a roadmap we have been on since we drew this graphic in 2013. I will leave you to update it for where you think we are and where we are likely headed. So in closing, as I always remind you, remember the answer will be simply to print more money. It is the only answer politicians will ever agree upon until no one, that is, wants it or trusts it. Invest accordingly. I'd like to take a moment as a reminder, do not trade from any of these slides. They are for educational and discussion purposes only. As negative as these comments often are, there has seldom been a better time for investing. However, it requires careful analysis and not following what has traditionally been the true and tried approaches. Do your reading and make sure you have a knowledgeable and well-informed financial advisor. So until we talk again, may 2020 turn out to be an outstanding investment year for you and your family. I thank you for listening.